Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this SolarWinds MSP webinar on Making the Leap, how MSPs move to a proactive business model. I'm Dave Sobel. I am the Senior Director of MSP Evangelism here at SolarWinds. I am focused on helping you, the community member, get the most out of your relationship with us, advocating on behalf of solution providers, both internally and externally. So your voice within the leadership team, also your source of this kind of education, and I have the pleasure of hosting these webinars on a regular basis. Everybody always likes to know a little bit about my background. I was an MSP for a number of years, running my own business for about a decade. So I have been an MSP and I understand the struggles and trials and tribulations of day-to-day life as a solution provider. So before we dive in on the content, I've got a little bit of housekeeping to update you on. Everybody is on mute. It's not that we don't like hearing from you, it's that we want to make sure you've got the best quality audio. And it's tough to manage a ton of attendees all asking questions at the same time, but we love the questions. So go ahead and add those in the questions section on the GoToWebinar. It's right there on your GoToWebinar control panel. You can ask a question and we will be handling questions both as we go along, as they make sense, as well as a Q&A session at the end. Let us know if you've got any audio or video issues so that we can help you out in the chat session and get those things sorted. We've been doing this a while and we know all of the ninja solutions to get things fixed. And to answer your question, yes, the session is being recorded, so you'll get an access to those slides and this recording when we're done. So now that that is out of the way, and I've got to remind everybody that we are doing some forward-looking statements around product plans and development efforts, so we've got a legal disclaimer there as well. Now, on to what we're on to today. Today's topic is making the leap, how MSPs move to a proactive business model. We're going to spend about 35 minutes with Eric Anthony, who is our principal for customer experience here at SolarWinds. He's got a lot of experience being an MSP, running two different businesses in that space, as well as his time here at SolarWinds. I'll let him tell you a little bit more about that. We'll spend about 10 minutes at the end answering questions to make sure that we've got any of the questions from the content. But then additionally, after that, we'll dive in a little bit on the technical solutions, so like what products we were talking about that come from SolarWinds. So if you're already familiar with those, you could drop off and not have to worry about those pieces, and we will take questions during that session as well. And with that, I'd like to turn this over to my very experienced colleague, Mr. Eric Anthony. Eric, take us away.
Thanks, Dave. And by very experienced, Dave just means that I'm older than he is.
Oh, not at all.
So much older, in fact, that I actually owned my own break fix for 10 years and then had my own MSP for 6. They were two separate businesses. And so I'm very familiar with the transition from one to the other, which kind of made it natural for me to discuss the making the leap topic that we're going to talk about today. My current position here at SolarWinds MSP is just making sure that customers can engage us and that we're providing the best experience possible to our customers. And of course, part of that is making sure you're successful with our products. So we come up with things like this to help you out. Now, content like this and other things in both the business realm and the technical realm are available on the MSP Institute. And that page is available either through the SolarWindsMSP.com website or the new Customer Success Center. If you're a customer and have not checked out the new Customer Success Center, I urge you to do so. There's a lot of great information there, not just the Institute, but it's also the portal for support, as well as some really great forums that you can interact on, ask questions, and things like that. The Institute itself is built to actually be a learning and training portal, so there are structured classes and opportunities to learn about the products as well as how you should operate your business, both from a sales and marketing standpoint and an operations standpoint as well. So we encourage you to get engaged there. Now, today we are talking about the transition from a reactive to a proactive model. So what does that mean? Well, typically we separate that up into about 4 different buckets, but remember that this is a spectrum. Nobody is usually confined to one bucket. You usually have customers that cross these spectrums, but really what we want to do is try and get most of our customers into that proactive or managed model. Now, our numbers suggest that still 75% of IT service providers are working in the break-fix a la carte realm, which is what we're going to refer to as reactive, and then about 25% have moved to the proactive and managed. There are, obvious advantages to certain types of business models, and what we're going to talk about today is specifically how do you make that leap from a la carte to a proactive service model. Now, we're going to take a poll real quick about what stage your business is in now, whether you're break fix, a la carte, proactive, or managed. So go ahead and give us an idea of what types of percentages we have on this call, because it'll also help me kind of gear the call a little bit and things to talk about, but it'll give us an idea of where everybody's at as well. And while we're doing that, Dave, if I remember correctly, you started your business out kind of straight out as proactive. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're right. And so when I started from day one, it was kind of what we might call a block time style, but it was a specific set of deliverables that was done on a monthly recurring basis. So it was very much approaching it kind of from that proactive, maybe that more than fully managed, but I never really started my business with anything break fix.
Yeah. And kind of the same with my second business as well. I had already done the break fix for a long time before. It was kind of a consulting and break fix type of situation. But then when I started my second business, I knew I wanted to start it strictly as an MSP because of the recurring revenue model. Now we have our poll results up here, and actually very interesting from our results earlier, because we did do this webinar earlier today as well. And the break fix and managed are the leaders of this one, whereas before a la carte and proactive. So a little bit of a different audience here.
Yeah. But it does show diversity across, essentially, no matter who you're talking to, there's always a bit of a spectrum of people in the way that they're approaching managed services or computer consulting in general.
Correct, because none of these are far and away leaders, right? There's no huge skew in managed or break fix. It is kind of even across the board, which is interesting and does speak to that spectrum that we talk about all the time, in that, it's very hard to put, one MSP in one specific bucket a lot of times. They're doing business across a range of customers. Okay, so let's dive into these different ones just so we kind of get a mental picture of what each one looks like and some of the advantages and disadvantages to each. So break fix, basically is pretty simple. Something breaks, you get a call, you go fix it. Your revenue is primarily generated from billable time, and your failures can be, or not your failures, but the failures of the IT equipment and stuff at the customer can be expensive and cause pretty significant downtime, which, as we all know as business owners, is extremely expensive to your business. So we liken this to a building with no smoke detectors. So a fire breaks out, nobody knows about it, so nothing gets done, the building burns entirely down, and you basically have to rebuild it from scratch. That's kind of what break fix is like, because you have no premonition as to something happening, and you usually don't get the call until it's so far along that it's kind of in a disaster mode. With a la carte, we're starting to pick up a little bit of proactive stuff here, but it's not monitored. So something breaks, you get a call, you fix it. It's still very similar to break fix in that term. Your revenue is primarily generated from billable time, but you're starting to add some revenue from add-on services like AV, patch management, web protection, stuff like that. But again, you're not monitoring those things, and you're also not maintaining them. Failures are still going to be expensive and still cause significant downtime. Now, when we go to our building analogy, this is like having smoke detectors in the building, but there's no monitoring, no maintenance. So there's nobody making sure that smoke detectors are working. There's nobody making sure that the batteries are changed on a regular basis. There's just absolutely no proactive approach to how the system works for the building, right? Smoke detectors are there, but you don't know if they're going to work or not. So that's when we move into proactive. Proactive, something starts to break. You get notified before a catastrophic failure occurs, and so you can actually do something about it. Now, in this model, your revenue is typically kind of split between billable time and recurring revenue because, of course, you're starting to put together packages that include your time for doing the basic monitoring and maintenance tasks. Those services are packaged into a preventative solution as opposed to a la carte, where they're typically listed as line items. And your failures now become less expensive and cause less downtime because they're less catastrophic. This is like having smoke detectors and having somebody go around and test those smoke detectors and change out the batteries on a regular basis to make sure that they're always working and you're always notified as quickly as possible in the case of a fire. So let's move on to managed then, and this is where something starts to break. You get notified before a catastrophic failure, so very much like a proactive model, but now your revenue tends almost 100% towards recurring revenue. And what we mean by that is you're not billing any extra labor for the regular delivery of the IT services, including the remediation. So proactive includes all of the proactive maintenance and monitoring of the system, but it doesn't include the labor when something goes wrong. The managed delivery service means that you're actually including the cleaning things up when things go wrong. Now, of course, in this model, failures are minimal because of the way you're delivering the services, and it causes very little downtime. Now, if we look at our building on fire model, the smoke detectors with monitoring and maintenance, that comes over from the proactive, but now we've added a sprinkler system. And the difference here, like I said, is the remediation part of it. So something goes wrong, and now you have automated or manual things in place that automatically take care of that fire. The example that I like to use a lot is hard drives. So say a hard drive fills up, throws an alert in your dashboard. Well, in a proactive model, you would see it and you'd call the customer and say, hey, do you want me to fix this? Or in a managed model, you're actually going to either just go ahead and fix it, or even better, you're going to have an automated service tied to that alert that is going to go ahead and run like a disk cleanup and try and resolve the situation automatically, just like a sprinkler system would if a building was on fire. So how does this then relate to our chart? Well, we still have break fix, a la carte, proactive, managed. What we see talking to MSPs and IT service providers all the time is that there's a big gap between a la carte and proactive, because a lot of times it's very difficult to explain to the customer the value of going from a la carte to proactive, but also getting the IT service provider to let go of billable labor that they might be collecting every month and bundling it into their proactive package. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today, is how do you address some of those issues in jumping that gap between a la carte and proactive service delivery. Now, if we look at a typical a la carte invoice versus a proactive invoice, you'll notice that on the a la carte invoice, everything is listed by line item. You're selling them an antivirus product, a patch management product, a web protection product. You're not doing any services in addition to just delivering those software packages. So they could be purchasing those off the shelf just as they were purchasing them from you, because you're not providing any of your expertise and know-how to actually make those services any better. In proactive, it's one line item. You're delivering those same services, but they're just tools in your toolkit. Your know-how and your expertise are actually being bundled in with that to monitor and maintain those products, which is the difference between a la carte and proactive. In a la carte, you're not monitoring or maintaining those smoke detectors. In proactive, you're monitoring and maintaining those smoke detectors. So if anything goes wrong, you know about it and you can take care of it much, much more quickly. Now, this brings us to something that I like to talk about: commodity versus value-based pricing. As we saw on the last slide, you have line item, basically software products that somebody could purchase off the shelf, or you have a service package that you're selling them as a managed service provider. An example, they might be able to buy AV off the shelf for $39 a year, probably cheaper, but they have no guarantee that it's working. They have no expertise to know what to do when something goes wrong with that AV. Now, you as a managed service provider are going to be managing that AV. So you're monitoring to make sure that it's running. You're monitoring it to make sure that the updates are being done. And most importantly, you know when something goes wrong, when a virus is found, so that you can do any further remediation if necessary. Now, I akin this to somebody who goes to a store and can purchase tools. So you go to your local Home Depot or Lowe's, and you can purchase all the tools you want to build a house. But if you don't have the skill to use those tools to build a house, it's not going to turn out very well. And that's where the true value of you as IT service providers can actually bring to the table. It's not how, what tools you use, it's how they're delivered that makes the difference. Okay, we have another poll. And this is, what are the problems you need to solve for customers? And these are some technical, some business oriented. So give us an idea of what you perceive is the most important things for your customers.
While we're getting the poll, one of our listeners makes a really great point, talking about even though conceptually you're putting one line item on the billing for all the packaged services, a lot of customers do insist on having several lines detailing all the services and the solutions in that one line item, because they do want to know what they're getting. And by the way, that's a really good best practice, because you can show all the value of that one heavy duty line.
Right. Now, when I was making up those types of quotes, I would quote them and show them the individual pieces, but I would bill it as one number. You can list it all out so they understand what features they're getting, but one number so that your value is bundled in there. All right, so these results are very similar to the ones we got earlier today. With security obviously being the #1 concern right now. That we're seeing that across the board in the industry. Security is the thing that most people are concerned about. What I do like to see here is a lot of people saying that continuity and efficiency are very important, because that's true. Those are the things that are probably top of mind for your customers, because they're worried about making sure their business is running smoothly and making sure that their business is running continuously. Antivirus and backup, obviously still important. But those are things that we bundle into the services that we provide to get better security, better continuity, better efficiency. Would you agree with that, Dave?
Yeah, I absolutely would.
All right. So how do we start packaging those things together to put them in front of customers and start delivering better value to our customers through a proactive package? Well, we start out with basic needs. Like we talked about before, the things that are important to customers, making sure that their systems are up and running, making sure that their employees are as efficient as possible. When we do that through monitoring the endpoints to make sure that they're not having any hardware or software failures that we may be able to fix right away. And also going back to that automation piece that we were talking about before, there are a lot of things that you can set up to automatically monitor. We talked about hard drive space, but also in terms of software, we can watch services, right, and make sure that services maintain that they're running. And if they're not, we can do things like trying to restart them, and that helps keep those systems up and running and reduces the number of help desk calls to you as well. But in the long run, really the most important part there is that it keeps the customer running and efficient. We also want to protect them from common risks. So things like antivirus, right? We want to protect them from the most common risks, patch management, because one of the #1 vectors is the vulnerabilities that you have when your browsers and your plugins are not patched and your operating system is not patched. So that type of basic protection is going to be required in any kind of basic management package that you put together. And then, of course, a simple backup solution, whether it's just on their server because that's where they store all their data, or you're doing something like using our backup documents feature to make sure that just the documents and important business files are backed up from those systems. So that's something, in terms of a basic management service that you could put together as your initial offering to a proactive customer. But what if you wanted to do a little bit more? We saw in that poll that security is really, really important for customers. So we want to put together probably something that's above the basic package that starts to bundle in more security type options. And so some of those security solutions would be things like web filtering or mail filtering, because of course with mail filtering you have the opportunity to block things before they ever get to the endpoint, because the more things we can block before that gets to the endpoint, obviously the better. Things like risk intelligence, of course patch management is already going to be in here. And we can also move up to other, backup and disaster recovery type options where you can restore, servers and workstations back to normal much more efficiently by using a more thorough backup and disaster recovery product as well. And then things like virtual CIO services. We throw around a lot of terms like trusted advisor and virtual CIO, but what does that really mean? It means becoming an integral part to their business and not just their technology. And some clients are going to want this, some clients aren't, but it's really important as a IT service provider, because we touch so many things in terms of their business and how their business runs, from their line of business software to their communications, when it comes to email and voice over IP, all of those things are tightly integrated, and they really need one person, and that's you, to consult with them through all of those decision-making processes. And you need to listen to their needs and be able to apply solutions to those needs. So those virtual CIO and trusted advisor type of services are very important as well. All right, so pricing packages. So how do you distinguish your real value as an MSP? The value of an MSP is not in the tools that they use, but in how they deploy and use those to protect their customers and make their customers more profitable through making them more efficient. So I'm not going to give you an exact formula. I'm just going to give you the components of the formula, and then you can kind of put it together for yourself. But obviously the cost of your tools need to be in there, whatever RMM platform you're using, the AV solution, whatnot. And then the estimated labor for delivering those things. There's a lot of things that you don't want to forget are part of a proactive or a fully managed service in terms of estimating that labor for delivery. In a proactive model, you want to make sure, especially if you're including patch, that you're including some labor, because not all patches are equal. Stuff happens with patches when they come from the vendor. They're not always perfect. And so you're going to spend some time every once in a while having to manually remediate patches. It's just the nature of the business. You're going to have to restart services from time to time. So there is a little bit of labor that you want to make sure that you tie in there to your proactive model if you're doing proactive offerings. Now, if you're doing managed services, same thing, except you're also going to need to include in there some remediation. Now, a lot of times there's no other way to figure this out except for doing it a little bit over time, figuring out, what your average labor to remediate problems is per device, and lump that in as part of your costs in pricing your package. Then you want to add in value. So one of the things I use to describe this is, back in the day when I had my break fix, people would pay us to come in once a month, make sure their AV was up to date, make sure the patches were installed, all of the regular maintenance stuff that we can now automate with an RMM platform. We used to go seat to seat to seat and actually bill time for. And so the value of that hasn't changed. And in fact, with an RMM platform, you can now actually deliver those services better. So they actually have higher value, because instead of doing it once a month, you can do it once a week, once a day, or even once an hour for a lot of things. So the value is actually increased. So I'd actually go in and make sure that the value of what you're delivering is based on what the customer is getting out of it, not the cost of the tools that you're necessarily using. And then of course, profit. You need to know what your profit margins need to be as a business to maintain your growth, your employees, all of those kinds of things. So make sure you calculate your profit in there as well. And I want to reiterate, the ability to automate a lot of these tasks does not make them less value. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're including a good amount of value for the services that you're delivering, because they are worth it to the customer. The problem comes in, how do we communicate that to the customer? Okay, so that's a great transition into this poll, where we're going to talk about what kind of marketing materials do you guys already have, do you already use to talk to your customers with? Do you have a strong value proposition? Do you have a sales presentation that you can, pull out and show to customers if they ask you for a detailed presentation? Do you have an elevator pitch, so that when you're talking to somebody and you've already told them your value proposition and they look interested in more, do you have something that you can tell them in 2 minutes that really describes what you do? And then brochures, flyers, videos, those types of things. What actual pieces of execution do you have that you're using in your business today? Now, Dave, of these, what did you have when you were running your business?
So I actually had bits of all of them. We used videos for case studies. We thought that was a really valuable way to both promote and aggressively tell people about our story. We used, we had leave behind things like flyers, but what I was focused a lot on was also our elevator pitch. Was making sure that we could describe our value pretty quickly. How about you?
Yeah, I pretty much had all of those. Of course, I subscribed to some of the marketing gurus of the time, and so value proposition was really important. Elevator pitch was really important. I would say I probably did not have a strong sales presentation, simply because we had a pretty good reputation in town. And once somebody found out about us, I really didn't have to pitch my sales that tough. Brochures and flyers obviously were big, and we were just getting into videos. And it actually surprises me with these poll results that videos are such a low number. That's really, really interesting. And I want to dive into that for just a second, because videos are becoming extremely strong in terms of being able to deliver really short, really engaging content with customers, especially over social media. And I know, and I was a naysayer about social media for a long time in terms of business to business type advertising, but it really has taken off, and right now it's actually still a pretty good deal. Now, I like the fact that a lot of you do have formalized elevator pitches and you're using brochures and flyers. I think brochures and flyers, I think there's still a really important place for those. When I was an MSP, I would give these to my techs when they were out on the road. They would have what I call the shock and awe box, which I know a lot of your marketing gurus will tell you about. And if they saw somebody that was like next door to an existing customer that they thought might be a good prospect, we'd drop one of those off. And one of the most important things, of course, in that shock and awe package was the brochures and flyers. So one thing that I would be interested in, and I know we don't have a poll for this, but if anybody had any questions about doing what it takes to do videos, or what the best outlets for doing videos are, if you guys want to ask those type of questions, I would be interested in kind of talking through some of those when we get to the Q&A section. All right, so what can we do with these marketing materials? Well, with the value proposition, you want to make sure that you can explain very quickly why proactive is better than reactive. And really what it comes down to, and I think for me the best analogy, at least the one I can wrap my head around, is that building on fire. If you had a fire, what would it take for you to recover your building if it burned all the way down? Or if you just limited the fire to a certain area because the fire department got there in time because the smoke detectors were properly monitored and maintained. Come up with your own analogy or use mine, doesn't matter, but something along those lines so a customer can really grasp quickly what the value is going from a reactive to a proactive model. And of course, you're not going to want to call them that. You're going to want to call them something that customers can relate to a little bit better in terms of, a complete service versus, just, selling them AV, things like that. A sales presentation, obviously, if you have the opportunities to get in front of customers because you've delivered a value proposition, sales presentation is going to give you a structured presentation to be able to go through that allows you to hit all of your key points and hopefully answer a lot of their questions and see where your services are going to not only protect them from things that go bump in the night, but also create efficiencies within their business that's going to return positive ROI even if they don't have any catastrophic failures. And then of course your elevator pitch, because you always want to be prepared to be able to talk to somebody about your business even if you only have 2 or 3 minutes to talk to them. And so your elevator pitch is basically just a 2-minute version of your sales presentation. And I put it after the sales presentation here because you need to do your sales presentation. Even if you never present it to anybody, you should do your sales presentation before you do your elevator pitch, because it really is, the elevator pitch is just the boiled down version of your sales presentation. And of course, your sales presentation is driven by your value proposition, and that's why you have to do that first before you can do your sales presentation. So that's for new customers. What can we do about existing customers? Well, the first thing, and I know a lot of people have heard us harp about this a lot, and that is scheduling regular business reviews or QBRs or whatever you want to call them. I did it depending on size. If they were a larger customer, I would do it quarterly. If they were smaller, I'd probably do it annually. But it's a chance to get in front of your customer to find out what's changed. Not only changed in their business, but also what's changed in the world of IT services. I mean, right now, and according to the poll, everybody's concerned about security, right? And security is probably one of the fastest changing things when it comes to especially small to medium-sized business IT services, right? So it's not just you listening to them about what their needs are. That's obviously important because it allows you to plug more of your services in to meet their needs, but also communicating what's changed in the market to tell them so that they can add, things like web protection or mail filtering, so that they can add those additional layers of protection on top of what they already have. And that's where the customer services heat map comes in. Now, this is a downloadable that you can get from the MSP Institute. So all you have to do is go in, take the classes on the business part of the training, and the heat map is something that you can download. And I don't know about you, Dave, but I used something very similar to this in my business when I was an MSP, not in my break fix, but when I was an MSP. And basically what it does is it shows you which customers have which features, so that you know which features to market to which customers or which features to bring up when you do a QBR. Did you use something similar to this, Dave?
Yeah, I use this technique as well, and because ultimately one of the interesting things about this kind of information is that we've found through a lot of research that some of those MSPs that are getting best-in-class performance actually are the ones that have the best penetration of all their offerings across all of their customer base. It's easier to scale up when everyone is consuming the same stuff from you. So actually looking at this and using this style heat map to make sure that you're growing out the business in your existing customer base is actually super useful.
Yep, and actually, Dave, that reminded me of two really important things when it comes to moving up to proactive and fully managed. Number one is consistency, or the standardization across customers. And so the consistency of feature adoption, making sure all of your customers are using the exact same features and products, really helps your efficiency in running your MSP. It also lowers your liability because you have more customers protected against everything. The other thing I wanted to say is that it is much easier to sell into your existing customer base than it is to go out and get new customers. And it also is going to help with customer churn, because the more products and features that you're delivering to a customer, the stickier they're going to be. But also, the more features you have deployed, the better chance you have of actually delivering better service to that customer. And so the more likely they are to stay with you because of the positive experience. Okay, so when we're talking about prospects and acquiring new customers, we want to use that value proposition that we talked about in order to start conversations, right? And then use that sales presentation after you've been kind of given permission to do a whole presentation. We never want to start out with a long sales presentation until we've kind of gotten that permission to show it to a customer. And then also, a lot of people use break-fix engagements and specialty services as a foot in the door, because a lot of your customers, when they're seeking you out, they're not seeking you out because everything's running great and they go, oh, I think I need a managed service provider. No, usually it's because they have a problem. And so what you want to do is make sure that you have a process in place that when a customer calls you for a break-fix engagement, that literally just works as a sales opportunity for you to be able to then take that customer and go, customer, we fixed your problem. Now what we recommend is getting you on this schedule of services that's going to prevent this from happening again, or at least, at the very least, minimize the impact to your business if it does ever happen again. And then, of course, we can also use specialty services, things like assessments and security scans, things like that, to get your foot in the door, things that maybe some other IT service providers in your area don't do, because that's also very important to distinguish you from your competition, is those specialty services that you can use to kind of go around any services that they might already have installed with that customer. Okay, and then of course, measuring success. You can put all this stuff in place, but if you're not measuring what you're doing and you don't know the outcome, you can't improve on them or discard the things that aren't working for you. So, measure things like how many sales presentations were you able to book off a certain marketing activity. So if you sent out 100 postcards and you did 5 sales presentations, you want to mark that number for a couple of reasons. You want to see which marketing activities yields you the most presentations. And then of those presentations, which ones actually, which presentation worked better? Or if you figured out you described the reactive to proactive model in a certain way, you actually closed more business. Things like that you want to keep track of. And then in terms of existing customers, you want to know how much existing customers are increasing their revenue after you're doing those business reviews with them, because you want to make sure that those business reviews are actually generating you revenue. They are a consultative process, but you want to go into them with the mindset that you want to generate revenue out of them. They're not a sales presentation, although they can turn into one if something significant in the industry changes and you have a new feature that you want to deploy or need to deploy to their environment. That's going to be a little bit salesy because it's something new that you're going to be presenting to them. And then you want to take all these measurements and, of course, review them and refine all of your sales and marketing efforts so that you can improve them over time and just keep getting better and better. And obviously then the return on investment of those things becomes greater and greater over time. So a couple of key things that we want you to get out of today. There is a value gap between a la carte and proactive services that can very often be difficult to define. We want to make sure that you guys can make that leap very well. And so a lot of the material in here is designed to help you do that. We want to make sure that you can define and package those offerings so the value is obvious and that the benefit to the customer is there as well as the profit to your business. And then the marketing must clearly communicate value proposition, because the biggest difference, as we saw in the beginning from a la carte to proactive, you're using the same tools. So the tool set is not the difference. The expertise of you and your employees are the difference in that value going from a la carte to proactive. And that's what you're bringing to the table, and that is worth money. So we want to reflect that in the packaged services that you create in either a proactive or a managed services model. All right, so now we can open it up to questions and see what we got.
Sure. So just a reminder, if you've got a question, go ahead and put it into the questions panel of the GoToWebinar control panel. We will be pulling all the questions from there. But first off, Eric, somebody's asked about, what about projects? How do you handle projects in this approach?
Great question, because I shouldn't say there's no right or wrong answer, but there's a range of answers here. And a lot of it depends on what type of project, because we can determine project work as being a couple of different things. Sometimes add and removes. So if a customer adds a new workstation, that's usually a new project, because it's not something that was covered under the old package. So we're adding additional volume to the package. So that project is usually getting that machine added to the network. Once it's added to the network, then it gets added as, part of the managed services contract. The other thing is big upgrades, right? Things that are unplanned. So big networking upgrades, voice over IP installations, things that just wouldn't be covered under the regular managed services project. Now, there's a lot of things that could be covered under a managed services project. Things like regular updates. So a lot of people build into their contracts things like 3 and 4 year refreshes, right? And this is for a lot of times, let's just talk about a workstation for a minute, where the manufacturer warranty may be 3 years. And so we want to do an automatic refresh of every workstation every 3 years when it runs out of warranty. Because that's an expected and you can calculate, when those are coming along, then, and you're not adding a new user, you're just taking from one workstation to the next, those oftentimes are included in your managed services contract. Now, the other difference is if we're talking between proactive and managed, because a lot of times proactive won't include project work, whereas like I just described with some of those things like hardware refreshes, those might be included in your managed services contract. So again, kind of like you have to include the labor for remediation in managed services, but not in proactive when you're considering your cost structure. Kind of the same difference when you're talking about project work. You want to clearly define in your proactive agreement or your managed services agreement what's included and what's not in terms of project work.
Gotcha. And we've also been asked about how are adds, moves, and changes handled?
So there's some flexibility here, and I touched on it a little bit with the last question, but adds, moves, and changes, if you're going to include them, again, you want to make sure that you include some cost in there as well. For the customer, usually what I would do is adds are never included because there's something over and above the existing managed services contract. You have to add them as a new unit, whether you're doing a per user or a per device model. Moves and changes, usually I would include those, but I would make sure that I had the right amount of labor included to maybe move a device, once a year. And if it was a premature change, I would probably include that, because most of the labor from a premature change of like a workstation is going to be dealt with by the manufacturer's warranty rather than the MSP. So that's usually how I would structure it, but there's a lot of flexibility in how you want to do business, and it's one of the things that'll distinguish you versus your competition.
And I think it's more important just to make sure to focus on that the expectations are set. I've seen some solution providers say, we allow a variance of 5%, and then anything beyond that is billable. But more importantly, just set the expectation. So, Eric, we got some additional questions. So, if you're inexperienced in managed services, how do you mitigate the risk when setting rates per device? If you don't factor in enough labor, how do you mitigate that risk?
So what I did, and I'm an engineer type, so I took kind of an analytical approach to this, and this is the approach I recommend if you have the data available, is go back to your existing customers and look and see how many devices they have and what their billable labor has been over the past year. If you can get it 6 months, if you have to, longer if you can, because it'll just make the averages more accurate, right? And use that to help you determine what an average amount of labor you put into an individual device is across your customers in a given year.
Gotcha. Makes perfect sense. So, how do you determine minimum seats? Do you have to?
Oh, that's always a tough one. Because we deal with customers of, from 2 computers to 2,000, it depends on your market space or your market target, really, rather than your space. If your target is micro businesses, then minimums are going to be very hard. If you live in a very rural area, if your service area is very rural and your businesses are really small, you're going to have to accept those minimums. If you can, it will be more profitable for you if you can put minimums in there, but it really depends on your business model as to how you do that. However, it is more profitable to put minimums in there, and it does reduce what happens in terms of changes over time.
Gotcha. Well, so do we have resources like sales materials, contracts, marketing material stuff? Is that available in the Institute? How would people get access to that?
There's some in the Institute. There's also a lot of materials that are available through their account managers. So if they just get some time with their account managers, they can go over some of the materials available and they can email those out to them as well.
Gotcha. And if you're not familiar, if you haven't used our Success Center, which is right available off of the SolarWindsMSP.com website, you can actually see who your account manager is right on the site and reach out directly. So, Eric, we've got a little bit of time. We'll keep the questions coming during it, but you've talked a little bit about some of the technologies here. Do you want to dive in a little bit more on some of the specific SolarWinds technologies you talked about?
Yeah, sure. As promised, there's a lot of different ways to learn more about the SolarWinds products. We're going to talk about a couple of them in just a minute, kind of in the way that they refer to the topic that we've been discussing. But just so that you know, if you want to learn more about the products in general, we offer a couple of ways to do that. Number one, we have 45-minute technical deep dives. So if you really want to go deep into a subject, we have sales engineers available. Their time is scheduled. You get 45 minutes one-on-one with somebody who can go through the really, really technical stuff, like automated deployment, disaster recovery testing, customizing your reporting, all of those more advanced type of topics. A sales engineer can just walk you right through. They can show you in your dashboard how to set these things up and get you running. In addition to that, a lot of our products, if you haven't tried them, have a self-guided 30-day trial. So you can try the full features of the product. There's a lot of online training, especially like for the backup. And like I said, access to sales engineers is critical if you really want to get in there and kick the tires on something. That gives you the ability to do that at any point. And by the way, whether you're a new customer or a long-standing customer, those sales engineers are available to you at any point in time. There's absolutely no charge for them. So anytime you want to just get a refresh or you have new employees that you want to get up to speed on the product, you can do those things through the sales engineers. Now, if you have those types of questions or if you want to know anything else about the products, go ahead and type contact into the chat window and we'll make sure that your account manager reaches back out to you. And you can do that at any time during the rest of the webinar. All right, so what are some of the things that we could use out of the SolarWinds MSP platform stack to create some of those packages that we talked about? Well, when we talked about a basic management package, we talked about patch management, and that's kind of a security feature, but it's also a maintenance feature, just because in addition to the security threats that it will ward off, it also helps, just to keep applications running well, and of course that makes your customers more efficient. Remote access, when I started my break fix company, there really wasn't that much, in the way of remote access products. Certainly not ones that were geared towards technicians. And this allows you to perform maintenance and take care of incidents without ever leaving your desk or doing a truck roll. When I started out in break fix, it was very expensive to deliver services because I actually had to go on location. And then automated maintenance. Automated maintenance, there's a ton of things that you can do straight out of the box with either of our RMM platforms to automate those common everyday tasks like defragging, which you don't have to do so much anymore with SSDs, but disk cleanup and just other types of routine maintenance that you can script or that we have built-in tasks for. Monitoring, obviously, going back to the smoke detector analogy, making sure that you know exactly what's happening with your customers' endpoints, whether it's a workstation, a server, or a network device like a switch or a router. All of those things can be monitored through the RMM platforms. And then, of course, some type of basic security in the form of a managed AV so that you can manage and monitor those malicious events in real time. So that's kind of what a basic package would look like delivered from either of our RMM platforms. And then, like we talked about before, if you want to go beyond that and say you wanted to create a security package, now we can layer on different features to just create a more extensive security offering. Patch management, obviously, still included in here. Risk intelligence, if you haven't seen that, is a product that scans your devices and looks for vulnerabilities. In addition to the patch type vulnerabilities, it'll look for other configuration type liabilities that might be on your endpoints. But most important, or kind of most interesting to me, is the fact that it will go through and it will look for things like credit card numbers, dates of birth, social security numbers, all of those kinds of pieces of information that would be valuable to a malicious actor if they were to breach your customer's systems. And this can be run both as an assessment and as a monitoring tool. So risk intelligence can actually be set up to monitor these devices for what I like to call critical data creep. And what that means is, there are certain pieces of critical data that you have to store. Social security numbers of your employees, credit card numbers for customers, things like that, that you have to store. And as long as you store them in a protected, secure location, on a server, whatever, that's perfectly fine because you've created a curtain or a security barrier around that data. The danger that frequently occurs is when somebody copies that data out onto, say, an individual workstation that is not protected as well as that data source on the server. So, and say they take that laptop home, the laptop gets stolen, well, that's when you really get into a problem. The risk intelligence product can actually scan those devices, and if it sees that data on a device that it's not supposed to be on, you as the MSP then get alerted, and you can deal with it to make sure that you're reducing their exposure in the case of a breach. And speaking of exposure and breaches, one of the really cool things about risk intelligence is it actually ties a dollar amount to the amount of risk that it sees on each machine. So that's really important when showing it to a customer. Of course, managed AV is going to be part of any security package. And then we layer on things like mail protection, which we talked about before. Hopefully will engage any malicious code before it ever reaches the endpoint. Web protection, so that it keeps people from getting to those malicious sites or clicking on malicious links. And then, of course, some type of backup as your final layer of protection against a catastrophic event, because if the worst does happen, we want to make sure that you can recover from that. Okay, we have a couple of upcoming webinars in April. So we have one on endpoint detection and response, and this is just going to basically be continuing the security conversation into some of the changing threat landscape and what you can do about it with the RMM platforms. And then another one that's kind of near and dear to my heart, because I am a Mac user, is the Mac RMM Essentials. We have done a lot of things over the past 6 to 12 months with the Mac agent, and there's more to come very shortly. And so what we want to do is we want to take people through what the Mac agent does now versus what it only used to do, because it really is a powerful tool to now be able to manage those Mac devices that maybe you didn't manage before. There's a lot of Mac devices out there. My argument has always been that there may not be a lot of them, but very frequently, if you go into the executive suite or the boardroom of any organization, small or large, there's a pretty good chance that a good percentage of those users are using a Mac. And so if you can't support the executive level users on their Macs, you might not get the rest of their business, and it's really the rest of that business that we're looking for. So the Mac agent really has had some great improvements, and we want to share those things with you guys. I think that's in the next month or so.
So Eric, we got one or two questions. We got a bunch of questions coming in, but I want to try and handle before we call it a day. I've got a great question that came in about when a virus or a ransom attack occurs because a user failed to follow procedures. How do you manage that?
So that goes back to one of the things that should be included in your proactive packages, in my opinion, especially when you get into a defined security package, maybe not in a basic package, but in a security package, is customer education. And you want to use those same business review appointments to try and do some of that as well. But in terms of remediation, if it's a proactive customer, they're going to have to pay for you to fix that problem. If they're a fully managed client, then you're on the hook for that remediation. But that should be calculated in to your cost structure when you're figuring out the package price for the managed service versus the proactive. And because one of the big differences between proactive and managed, like we said, is that remediation piece. You assume a lot more liability on the managed services side. So it's up to you to provide the training and make sure that you're doing the training correctly, or providing the extra services that's going to keep that from happening. So in the case of somebody clicking on a link for malware, a lot of times something like web protection, because even though it doesn't recognize the code, the AV might not recognize the code because it's a 0-day, it's still pointing back to a known bad reputation website, and therefore it can get blocked. Same thing with mail protection. We have, if you have the mail protection on there, if it's coming from, a weird source, it's going to go ahead and more than likely be blocked, so it never even gets to the customer. So it's a combination of training, because you'll never eliminate 100% of those things, but it's also layering on top to minimize your exposure as the MSP.
Gotcha. Well, we are out of time. We appreciate everybody's attention. If you've got additional follow-ups and you want to hear from us, go ahead and just put contact into that questions areas, and we will make sure we follow up specifically. We appreciate everybody's attention today, and look forward to having you on a future webinar. From those of us here at SolarWinds MSP, thank you for your attention, and we'll catch you next time.